Hey, hi, hello, you all. I'm so happy to be visiting with you again today. I always say I'm excited, but today you may notice that I'm extremely super excited in this episode because we're talking about a topic that I have grown up with since I was a youngster and field dressing animals with my dad out in our shed down in Southwest Colorado and just rural living. And something that my guest mentions is that when you get into something, you kind of don't realize that you know something that other people don't know. And that's paraphrasing, that is not a quote. But something that I had is I grew up field dressing animals and butchering animals. And since some of you are already hunters and some of you are not, you're just on your road to being hunters. I thought it would be wonderful to just learn so much more about the animal carcass, about the meat, and I wanted to share it with you. And it's something that I hope that you will reach out to me if you have questions, as always. And if you have something you'd like to add, which I would like to thank some of my listeners that have sent tips and advice, such as adding buttermilk to our meat that tastes a little bit sagey. I haven't recently had any meat that has that taste, but if I happen to get a deer that's in the sage flats this year, I will give this buttermilk soaking a try and see how that works to get that sage taste out. But I love it when you guys reach out and you communicate with me and you post your questions or comments. And as always, there will be links in the show notes to everything that we discuss. You can find them wherever you're listening or on the website at miaanstine.com. And I hope that this one serves you well and that you're having a great time. While you're listening, if you appreciate this episode, be sure to share it with somebody who could learn as well. I'm going to be sharing it with a local ag instructor as well as an FFA leader. So if there's somebody you think needs to listen, please share it. And as always, I hope you enjoy the show.
This summer, whether at the range or in the field, WSI Sports Hyper-Tech bamboo tanks, tees, and leggings will have you covered. Visit WSISports.com to support the show and use the affiliate code MACO10 for 10% off your purchase. All products are proudly made in the USA. WSI is bringing back pride in American-made clothing. Again, that code is MACO10 for 10% off your order at WSISports.com.
All right, you all. Thank you for joining in. I'm super excited this morning. I have Sierra with me, and Sierra is a meat scientist, and
Yes.
I had never heard of such a thing, but I was listening to the Cattlemen's Call, which is a podcast from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, of which I am a member. Even though I don't raise beef for food, I actually raise corrientes, and they are athletes. They're used in pennings and sortings and breakaway roping and stuff like that. And a lot of people ask the differences in animals. And then they also look at me because I'm a hunting guide and a hunter. And when I heard Sierra on that podcast, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a meat scientist. So for those of you who listened to our last episode, we talked about the best tasting game meat and ways to handle our animals. But today we're going to dive in deeper, I think. And Sierra is going to give us a bunch of information. So Sierra, welcome to the show. Would you please introduce yourself to my audience and let them know what you do?
Yes, thank you, Mia, so much for having me. My name is Sierra Jepsen. I am the owner, lead butcher, and the meat scientist for Butcher Solutions, LLC, which is my business. And it is a traveling butcher school, which is a very unique entity. There really aren't any traveling butcher schools like mine that go to the meat processor. There might be some opportunities for folks to go to an institution or have an externship or something where they travel to a different state or facility to gain some butcher training. But my whole business is based on a lot of our folks don't have time or the resources to leave their shops and go and have meat cutting training, or for a hunter or somebody who is transitioning to a different career who just wants to learn more about some at-home butchery methods. They may not be interested in going somewhere for a big, long, lengthy training. They might just need give me the basics so that I can be a better steward of my meat at home. And so I host hunting education workshops, which is a lot of what I'm doing right now this fall. But then I can also do meat science education workshops for 4-H and FFA groups, or for veteran services and folks looking for a new career, or something a little bit more hands-on. And so all aspects of the meat science industry are what I am passionate about and excited to bring to the table. I am from Ohio originally. I grew up on a beef cattle farm there. We kind of, span the whole Midwestern gamut. So raised beef cattle, but corn, wheat, soybeans too. And so I live in Livingston, Montana now. And so when I finished grad school at the University of Idaho, moving to Montana, where I want to work in the meat industry and with beef producers. And so Montana is a great place to be, and it's pretty easy for me to then travel the country and serve a wider audience, but especially hunters up in this part of the world too.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of hunting up there, but also aren't there more cattle than people in Montana? Is that
Yes. and I was also I taught at the University of Wyoming for a while, and so I think Wyoming also claims that statistic too. And so all of these western states where there are more cattle than there actually are people is great. So
yeah, it'd be interesting to know what people's guesses are when you ask them, like, who has the most cattle, because I think a lot of people, when they follow me on social media, I share, ranching and stuff like that. And a lot of them think I'm from Texas. And then it's like, no, I'm in Colorado. And it's like, oh, so I wonder how many would guess Montana for cattle.
yeah, and gosh, I need to look up the statistic, but I'm pretty sure Texas and California are, top the list with most cattle in the state. Florida, surprisingly, is up there too. Florida has a lot of beef cattle. But when it comes down to cattle per person,
Yeah.
Montana wins.
Right. A lot of open space there.
Yep.
So I would just am amazed that there is an actual thing. I mean, I've gone to like the beef checkoff and, learning how to raise quality beef, as a producer. We've gone to those classes, but it didn't really occur to me that there would be somebody who studies meat specifically. How did you end up doing this? Is it something that you wanted to do as a child, or how did you come to it?
Yeah, so when I was at Ohio State, I was an ag business major, and then I minored in animal science and meat science. And I didn't tack on my meat science minor until my senior year. I knew I didn't want to be a vet, and I wanted to be in the beef industry some way, somehow. I just wasn't sure how that was going to fit in. My sister, she farms full time with my dad, and she loves working with the cattle every day. For me, I love chatting with consumers and talking with people about the beef product, and working with the producer. So I was trying to find a career that could marry both of those two very different, aspects of the livestock world together. And so I was trying to take a beef production class, and I couldn't get in, it was full. And so I found this meat science class. And by the second day of taking that class on my senior year, I was like, whoa, meat science is everything I've been looking for. It's working hands-on with a meat product, which was so fun, like learning scientific names of muscles and like how to, actually cut products and working with these big carcasses. Like, it was so exciting. You got to buy knives instead of books. So any class that allows that was so fun. But then I realized that I could work with the producers of these livestock animals, and they were excited to work with a meat scientist, because our whole job is to find ways to make meats better. We're exploring tenderness, we're exploring sustainability and water management for the meat processing industry. And we're exploring, pathogens and how to make meat products safe, and how to cut meat differently so that we might be able to utilize more of the carcass. And so there are so many realms of the meat industry that we could dive into. But basically, I mean, we are here to help the livestock producer, but then meat scientists also are here to help the consumer, the end product be as tasty and juicy and flavorful and wholesome as it can possibly be. And so then I also still got to work with that end customer. And so meat science is just, it's the perfect way to be involved in the livestock industry, and for those who are really interested in where their food comes from and has questions about how can I incorporate, red meat proteins into my diet. So I consider myself a cut it and weigh it meat scientist, because my meat science research when I was a master's student was looking at ways to cut sirloins innovatively, so that we can have really tender sirloin products. We can maximize their water holding capacity, because sometimes the sirloin is like this overlooked cut that's a little bit boring, or you think of it as like the Applebee's steak, but it's actually this really exciting cut. And one of my like huge things right now is teaching hunters how to save the sirloin on their game and actually find those individual muscles to cut the culotte steaks and baseball sirloins and the sirloin tender. There's so much you can do with your game that is very similar to what you can have off of a beef carcass. And why shouldn't we have the same cuts come off of our game that we can have, in our freezer or order at a steakhouse? So working with hunters is something like new for my business, but it's very fun and exciting too.
Yeah. And I'm just like in awe. I'm like, okay, which direction do we go with this? Because
I know.
so many things that we could talk about. And I mean, are you writing the book yet?
No, and this business, it's not, I have a 9-month old. It's only 9 months old. I started, so I graduated from my master's program in December of last year. And by the following Friday, had launched the business and was officially, started here in Montana. So it was kind of like in my mind, it was my capstone project of my master's program. I had taken an entrepreneurship class and had entered some pitch competitions, like, seeing if this business was going to be feasible. So the business is still growing in itself. And, I'm figuring out which avenues are most beneficial for folks. So yeah, like you said, it's like today we could talk about the best beef products and what makes a Corrientes cattle different from an Angus. And we can talk about those things. But we could also talk about, piggybacking off of your last podcast about meat care for hunters. And we could talk about, innovative cuts that you can do with game. So
there's
yeah.
so much. It's just, to me, it just has me so excited, because I've been field dressing and processing meat since I was like 4 or 5 years old with my dad. And people are like, they let you hold a knife. And I'm like, yeah, I did. But he was a butcher in a grocery store when he was in high school. He worked in the butcher shop. And so he kind of taught us how to cut meat. And I've just gone from there. That's the only training I have. But it makes me wonder, like, how many hunters I have brought out here that we've guided on hunts. If they finish early and they have time to kill, we're like, hey, do you want to process your animal? And we'll show them how to do it, because many of them have never, even if they've hunted whitetail in Texas or, West Virginia or something, a lot of them haven't processed their own meat. And so it's really fun to take them through that process. And listening to you talk about how we can get these sirloins or special steaks off of the elk is just kind of mind blowing as well. Like, I'm just so excited.
Yeah.
Because I've never considered those names when I'm looking at the elk. And I have a hunter ed class tomorrow where I'm going to be talking to them about this stuff. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to learn some more. So, but before we get into kind of the cuts and stuff like that, will you tell us like the differences between maybe an Angus versus a Corriente versus an elk?
Sure. Yeah. And it goes back to genetics, and genetic capability of these animals, as well as diet, really is what influences their ability to taste great and their ability to put on marbling, which are those little white flecks of flavor that are within meat products. And so the difference, we'll talk just about domestic species of cattle, which would be the difference between like an Angus and a Corrientes. Angus beef cattle are a meat breed, and their main purpose is to, provide high quality beef for folks. My family, we raise Angus cattle. And Angus beef, the reason that they've developed such a wonderful reputation in the beef industry for flavor and tenderness is because they have the genetic ability to put marbling within their meat. Marbling is, what deems a beef product the difference between select and choice and prime. It is the intramuscular fat, and that is the last area that an animal deposits fat. They put on fat first around their internal organs to protect them as they're, out grazing, and same as people, you need fat around your internal organs. And then the second deposit of fat comes for that external layer, as well as around the muscle bundles. And so then that back fat deposits. And then the final deposit would be within the muscles. And so if an animal is not predisposed or able to put on marbling, then they will just continue to put on back fat. The more that you feed them, or the longer that they graze or are alive, they will just never have the genetic ability to put marbling in. And Corrientes is a breed that is meant to be an athlete, and is meant to be lean, and is meant to be used as roping cattle. And they are not using their energy stores, to put on muscle or fat. They are there to be the sprinters, not even the marathon runners. They are the sprinters. And if you think of a track and field event, the folks that are, like throwing the hammer and the discus and the shot put, like, they need to be like really, really strong. And yes, they are like really intense athletes, but they very rarely run the 100-meter dash and win. So we need those folks to spend a lot of time in the weight room. And then we need our sprinters to be putting on, lean and really intense muscle that can be used for quick bursts of speed. And so in the meat industry, but beef especially, I don't think folks realize that we actually have nutritionists that specially formulate diets for our animals depending on what their end purpose is. And so for our beef cattle, that their end destination is the plate. All of our critters, their end destination, they all have a change of career. Even dairy cattle have a change of career, and they end up our center focus on a plate. But for the bulk of their life, beef cattle such as Herefords, Angus, even Charolais, their main goal is to put on muscle and fat to provide this meat product. For our sporting cattle, those main goal, and the place where they live, down in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico, those grasses might not have as much high energy and carbohydrate nutrition that is necessary to put on the same level of fat and muscle that cattle grazing in the northern plains and the East Coast might have. And so 50% of what our meat products can be, meaning muscle and especially marbling, comes down to the genetic capability. The other 50% comes into the feeding rations and how high of a percentage of carbohydrate versus protein. And sometimes our little calves, they need a little bit of sugar to make them excited to eat grain. So we put some more molasses in there as well, or some baker's waste. And so we actually have nutritionists that work with those specific critters and what their end use will be to decide what kind of nutrition that those animals need. And something important to then remember as we're thinking the difference between beef cattle and lambs and sheep or pork or elk, whatever it might be, is that fat is flavor. And so when we think about why do beef cattle taste different than lamb products, and why do lamb, even though they are a little bit more intense of a flavor, why did they taste different than elk? And it comes down to fat. So beef cattle, you might notice that a grain finished beef animal is much more mild and maybe a little bit more rich than grass finished. So grass finished beef, the fat will be very, very yellow, and that's from the carotene that is actually in grass. And so it's the same coloring that ends up in carrots that makes a carrot orange. That carotene that is in a lot of native grasses will actually color that fat yellow. And so it'll definitely have a different flavor. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different color, and that equates to different flavorings. Um, lamb has a lot of branch chain fatty acids, which we can go down that path a different day. But those fatty acids are associated with aromatics and this a very intense aroma that humans can pick up on a very low level. And so that might be why some people really like lamb and other people really do not, is because they have a very specific kind of fat that creates this intense aroma. And it's very unique to lambs. And so again, fat is flavor. So it all comes back to the fat. And then in game, one of the reasons that we might want to trim our meat products I guess make it very trim as we're working up that animal, is because that gamey flavor is in the fat. If you have a very lean animal, or you trim down any of the extra steaks and things to a very trim level, then you can have a more mild flavor in your game. Also, stress plays a role. So the way that we take care of that meat care is important. But the big thing is to remember that fat is flavor. And so yeah, the level of leanness in your animal will ultimately dictate what that animal could taste like, or how intense that you want that gamey or that beefy, lamby, pork flavor, whatever it is that you're looking for. The fat level could really determine that.
Yeah, the fat level definitely does determine. And something that I had mentioned on our last episode was a instance of having a mule deer that had been living in the sage flats, and it ends up tasting like sage. And so for the listeners, I did have one of our listeners reported that he soaks his meat in buttermilk to get that flavor out. But now we're also learning that the fat is going to have an issue in that instance as well. So we're going to do some more experimenting with this meat. So I'm just amazed by everything that you're saying. And through the whole process, I'm curious about my daughter. She was in 4-H and FFA. And like her first year of 4-H, her pig won the carcass award. And now they don't do the carcass award anymore. And so we were super excited because we were like, to us, I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is to have a great end product. So we were like, you got grand champion by having the carcass award. But what I'm seeing here is basically that's what you're doing, is kind of judging carcasses. Do you work with any of these FFA or 4-H and help them know what they're doing when they're in the process?
Yes. So my previous career was at the University of Wyoming coaching meats judging teams. And so one of our favorite things to do every year was to host the state 4-H and FFA contest for the meats judging world. We also would go as a fundraiser for the meats judging team. We would judge carcass contests. And that was a great fundraiser for the collegiate meats team. And, we would actually go and get to be the officials for those county contests. Being a meats judging coach is very intense, and it's wonderful to take students into meat processing facilities, and so I definitely miss that aspect of my old job. And so here in Livingston, I've started donating some of my time to help coach some of the meats judging teams here, because it's one of the best ways that we can get students interested in the meat industry early on. I didn't know about it until I was a senior in college. I didn't know that meat science was something we could do. And you know what? You don't need a master's degree in meat science. You don't need a 4-year degree at a university. We just need to get young people interested in meat science earlier, so that then they are more curious about, as I'm raising my 4-H animals, what is the end goal? We tell them, and they know that it's about the meat that's on their plate. But how does walking your sheep or your hog or your steer, how does just walking that animal after school and getting them exercise
relate? I'm glad that you're mentioning that, because that's what I was going to ask you. How does that exercise or movement affect? Because I wanted to ask you the difference in like a confined raised animal versus a free range raised animal, and how that affects the meat. So if you would let us know, that would be wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. And we have to remember that the meat industry is here to serve a wide gamut of consumers. The reason that livestock producers have a multitude of ways that we raise critters is to serve what makes the customer feel good. And it's not necessarily because there is one best way to raise an animal. It's simply because, whatever limitations we have in the place that we live and what kind of meat products that customers expect. So I grew up in Ohio, and the nutritional aspect of our native grasses is much higher nutrition in grazing ability than it is out here in Montana. So I believe in Ohio, it is per acre, you can put 10 head of cattle on 1 acre. And that may have changed a little bit, but because the nutrition of those grasses is so high, you can have fewer or more cattle in a smaller amount of space. Here in Montana, the nutrition in those grasses is not as dense. They're not as densely nutrient rich. And so then you need 10 acres per one cow-calf pair. And so it might be that here in the West, we need more land to graze more cattle. In the East, you don't need as much space. And so, just nutrient wise. And so those animals can graze a little bit more closely together. You do have to think about overgrazing land and, making sure that we don't overuse that land to a point that then those grasses can't come back. And so confined animal feeding, such as in a feed yard or for a 4-H project, where those animals have a nice run where they can, go out and get exercise. And even in feedlots, those animals have plenty of space to move around, but they are just social animals, and they are herd minded. They want to be close together. The reason that we have big, dirt piles in feedlots is not because we're trying to get them out of the muck or whatever it might be. It's because those animals like to be on top of the hill, and they like to sit up there together. If you go to a feed yard, you will notice it is quiet. Social or vocalization and mooing and whatever it might be for the species is a sign of stress. And you will notice that when you go to a feedlot, it is quiet. Those animals are able to ruminate. They're eating, to whatever time of day they're being fed. They eat, and then they go off into their comfy place, and they all hang out together, and they chew their cud, and they're comfortable and they're happy. And so it's actually a very sustainable way to raise a lot of animals for the bulk of our population, because we don't have the land in this country for everything to be out on pasture all of the time to fill the need. And so a variety of beef and pork and lamb production practices are necessary. It is interesting that with a grain finished diet, we can hit those heavy carcass weights faster with fewer resources. We don't have to, spend 2 years raising an animal. We can spend, 12 to 18 months. And it creates a flavor that is a little bit more rich and mild. I personally prefer grain finished. It's just what I grew up on.
For the listeners, would you kind of explain to them, because there is this trend to grass-fed, grass-fed, grass-fed. And it's something that maybe I could spend a whole episode talking about that, but could you explain to them a little bit about what that means to be grain finished?
Yes, and grass finished, because grass fed, all cows eat grass.
Right.
And they need grass. And that's a misconception for our customer and for just the consumer industry or I guess the consumer as a whole, is that all cows need grass for their very specific type of digestive system. They have to have that high fiber diet. And so when we say grain finished, that doesn't mean that they are only eating grains, that they have hay. They need hays and forages and roughage to actually make their digestive system work. And so those critters are really only finishing, or that finishing referring to reaching that heavy market weight, putting in that intramuscular fat, that marbling, that would create a high quality product. That is only, the last 2-3 months of their life cycle. Those critters, they were, with mom on a cow-calf operation, very close to grazing beside mom for the first 6 to 7 months of their lives. And then they went off into a little, middle school, high school age herd with all their buddies when they were weaned. And then those critters, they started to eat grains or a higher protein, carbohydrate, grass forage, whatever was designed, formulated for them, they start eating higher dense nutrients in their forage. So whether that's adding a little bit of corn or soybean or cottonseed or whatever it might be to their ration, and those animals start to need more protein and carbohydrates to keep them growing. And so then once they reach a foraging ration, if they are strictly grass finished all the way through, you can still have a high protein. I think barley is really, really high in protein and carbohydrates. So it's, you can add more of the grass and less of the actual grain product. And so there are, and I'm not a nutritionist, and I'm not the one who makes these rations. And so we can bring somebody else in to talk about this. But it all comes down to grain finished means that there was corn or soybean or another grain that was introduced to their diet. Grass finished might be that maybe they were still in a space that was close to a barn, or they were in a space that was as wide open as Montana and allowed to just graze naturally. And so there is no nutritional difference in the end meat product, which is something I really want to harp on, because the nutrition industry does like to point to the science that grass finished animals have slightly higher omega-3s, which that is factual. If your diet is interested in adding more omega-3s, then you should eat fish, because red meat proteins are very characteristic for iron, protein, B vitamins, zinc, all these other things. Omega-3s are not something that red meat proteins are traditionally known for. And so that insignificant increased level is just not what the main focus of adding red meat protein to our diets is. So if you want more omega-3s, great, eat some fish and you will, skyrocket your omega-3s. The difference between grain finished and grass finished is strictly your own preference on what makes you feel good in terms of how that animal was raised, and then maybe the slight difference in the beefiness of the product. So long answer to a complicated question. Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of misunderstanding because of the mass marketing that's going on right now and the push to, I think in their minds, a lot of people think that, oh, this, as you said, the care of the animal coming up to, when you're going to butcher it, and that they think that because it says grass fed, that it wasn't in a pen being fed hay, because hay is grass. So there is some research to be done. Something that I recommend when people come to me and ask is, contact your local farmer, rancher. There are always some. If you look at your extension agent's office in your area, they can direct you to ranchers that sell direct to consumer and that kind of thing. And thank you for giving us the explanation, because I think it's super important. And when we're looking at people's need and they're wanting to eat healthy and be sustainable to the environment and stuff like that, as you explained, ranchers are sustainable. They are practicing conservation with their land use and how they handle the animals. And we have to know how many can go on our property, because if you don't have any grass to feed them, you cannot have any more cattle. So there's a lot that goes into it. And I think it's important for everybody to know that. And then we also have, as with my listeners, a lot of them, not all of them are hunters yet, but they're curious and they're interested in learning. And I think a lot of people are looking at hunting because they also see that as a natural food source. And I think some of them actually are looking for a connection to their food, which, talking about taking these youngsters and teaching them, about a carcass, it gives them that connection to the food. Because some people go to the grocery store and they don't even know, why is this 80% fat and why is this 90%, what it means about lean meat. So I think it's really great that you're sharing information with us. When we're looking at wild animals, you mentioned the cuts and the cutting. And as I said in a past episode, we talked about how to handle the animal in the field to help it taste better. And so once we get it home, and if we've aged it, what do you recommend as far as like a cutting process? Do you have any, quick snippets that you can tell us about how to start with the process of cutting our meat?
Yeah. Oh man. And I just did a workshop with Sitka, and
Oh, cool.
we did a cutting demonstration here in Bozeman, Montana. And so they were there with a filming crew. And so I'm hopeful that that video will be up on their website fairly soon.
I'll reach out to them and ask them.
Okay. Yeah, especially as we're rolling into hunting season right now. I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that that video will be ready to go because I demonstrate how to work up the front shoulder as well as a hind quarter. And
Excellent. To share that with my
something,
hunter ed kids too.
okay, so something to think and keep in mind for all of our hunters out there. Are they going to be able to see this video? I'm not sure.
For the
Okay.
listeners, if you're listening and you're driving or whatever, if you want to watch on YouTube, this is always up on YouTube and you can go check it out over there. And I'll have links in the show notes for everybody for anything we talk about. And I'll also put a timestamp to where we're at right now. So if you don't want to re-listen to the whole thing, you can just zip forward on YouTube.
Well, and so I have an elk hanging behind me, but then for everybody else, you'll just have to kind of imagine this. But when we're working up the front shoulder in any animal, as you're quartering out that critter, it is very common to raise up that arm, find the seam, and to separate off that front shoulder just directly where the shoulder blade is at, which is considered the clawed primal of that animal's shoulder. What you have left connected to the main trunk of the critter is the ribeye, or excuse me, the chuck roll, which a lot of people, when they work up their wild game, they just consider everything that's left on that main trunk to be neck meat. And that's just not true. Underneath that main clod that you have removed as the front shoulder, underneath that is where we get Delmonico steaks from, and the Denver cut steak, and your boneless chuck roasts. And so don't just work up everything that's underneath that front shoulder. Don't work it up as neck meat and think that that entire section is just needing to be ground up or put into a roast. There are really tasty steaks that can be found there. Unfortunately, when I did my cutting demo with Sitka, the gentleman who brought in some game there, he's like, "Oh, I already worked up the neck meat for you." I'm just like, "No." So I'm not able to show that aspect on there either, but I'm hopeful to hopefully get some more videos out and be able to show people how to get those cuts. But there are some tasty steaks and some really tender roasts that come from that section that's under the main shoulder. So don't be afraid to experiment with those cuts and use some of them as your steaks.
Yeah.
The best way.
I wanted to kind of interject for a second, because for my Colorado and New Mexico friends, we're not required to bring that part out. So just keep in mind, this is what that extra game bag is for, is you can cut that stuff off, and bring it. You don't have to just leave it there, even though it's not mandatory, because we make sure to take this part, but I want to know how to take it to get these good steaks.
Yeah. Yep. And as people are listening to this podcast, you can find my website is butchersolutionsllc.com, but you can also find me on Instagram. What you're going to notice is that my Instagram is not very robust, because I'm a one-woman show, and whenever I'm cutting meat, I can't also have my phone out. And so if there is something that you are interested in learning, you are probably not the only person that would like to have a video for it. And so if you could send me a message on Instagram and let me know what kind of a cut you are interested in learning, especially when it comes to game, and where does it come from? How do I find it? Let me know what cuts you want to know about, and I've got a moose in my fridge outside right now that I need to work up. So if you send me a message fairly quick, I can do some videos for you. But it's like anything, once you start getting more and more in depth and it's your career, you forget what other people may not know, and what's second nature for me is not second nature for everybody else. And so if you let me know what kind of cuts you would like to see, especially this hunting season, I can start doing more videos that show you exactly which primal this comes off of on the animal, how to find those seams, what the muscle is called, and I can show you a deep dive.
So when we're going to take that off, what we traditionally do is, we start up at the top and kind of strip the neck meat down.
Huh?
And so somewhere along down there, we're going to find another seam to get these other steaks off.
Yeah, and so if you think of the main loin muscle in a beef animal and an elk, whatever it is, it's called the longissimus dorsi. And that main loin muscle starts in the shoulder and it's very, very small. And then it gets bigger through the middle, and then it'll start to taper off again towards the hind quarter of the critter. And so up in the neck of that animal is where those really tender loin muscles start. And even if you imagine a ribeye steak, if you cut your ribeyes closer towards the front of the shoulder, there are some other extra muscles that are around them. Those, additional secondary muscles. Those muscles all originate in the shoulder, and then they start to get smaller as they go back, as those main loin muscles get bigger and take up that space. And so there is an intersection in the shoulder where we get our Delmonico steaks, which are basically the same thing as ribeyes. It's just they have some more of these secondary muscles. And so if you're able to take that entire like shoulder meat off together, then you're able to find, these unique clusters of muscles that are really great for chuck eye steaks, which are also called Delmonicos the closer they get to the ribeyes. You're able to find a big fan shaped muscle that has a lot of marbling in it. And that is what becomes the Denver cut steak. The flat iron comes out of the shoulder clod that you remove, which you can get the flat iron in any elk or moose or even antelope if you want to. We can get the teres major. We can get ranch steaks instead of an arm roast. There are so many different things that we can do. And
Wow.
man, I wish I could do a cutting demo for everybody today.
You're making me hungry too.
Yeah, I mean, this is, we can't do something today, but find me on Instagram and send me a message of what cut you want to learn, and I'll start doing more demo videos. If any young person is looking for an internship, I do need to hire a media manager. And so this is a plug. If you've got, anybody who's, really skilled, or not even really skilled, just somebody who can take some pictures and hold the camera, I would love to teach a young person, the marketing side of this industry too. And I mean, it's not something I'm not interested in. It's just when I'm holding the knife, I can't also hold the camera. And so I'd love to
Right.
have, I'd love to have an intern or somebody else who's interested in learning this business, which my whole goal for Butcher Solutions is to be able to have regional butchers all over the country. I've got some really great connections to the world of academia already. So to have a regional butcher in the Pacific Northwest and the Southeast and the Midwest, that way then when I do go and travel to meat processors to keep those costs down, I could send a regional butcher and then we can travel the country more. And so if there is anybody who's interested in a job, I could certainly use a marketing manager. And then if you yourself want to, become a regional butcher for Butcher Solutions, I can train you on how to find all these really cool cuts and muscles, and then you could be a regional butcher
It's
for us.
so cool. I mean, it's so exciting, and people probably laugh, but I'm sure my listeners understand because they do get to know me over the years. But I just think this is so exciting, and obviously, I want to talk to you for days. But I wish you lived closer. I'd be at your house for coffee every morning, and you'd be
Yes.
like, "Lock the door, turn off the lights. We're still asleep." But if we wanted, like, if we had an FFA club, or if there was a conservation organization or somebody wanted you to come and do some type of demo like you did with Sitka, do you have like a schedule, or do they just email you like I did, like, hey?
Yeah. Just reach out. Just contact me. My email is on the website. So
Yeah.
butchersolutionsllc.com. My email is on there. My phone number is on there. Call me. And I love working with 4-H and FFA programs. And back to the benefit of carcass contests, if anybody here is listening and either you yourself are a member of your fair board or you have connections with folks, bring back the carcass contests, because those are the best way for young people and even parents to be able to go into the cooler and see what your product actually looks like. And this is a plug for all livestock producers. I can't stress the importance enough to actually take the time to go and look at your animals hanging on the rail. You don't have to raise, thousands of animals and, go into a big packer to see what those products look like. You could take in 1, 3, 5, like a small sampling, but know what your genetics are doing. Are those animals actually able to put on marbling, or the more that they are fed, just the more back fat that's being put on? So is your genetic, makeup working? Is your feeding program working? Was that animal, like, did he need a little bit more time on the halter, not just so that he doesn't, drag your child all across the show ring, but because animals need exercise the same way that people do. And so whether you just for lambs, one of the things I love to see is when people build like little incline ramps for them to go up to their feed trough. So it's kind of like a calf raise for them every time. And so just little things that we can do to help build muscle in those animals. And you don't know what kind of a product that you're raising until you actually go to the cooler and look at it. And so teaching our students what the ribeye area looks like and how marbling is important to eating quality. And even if you and yourself, like if you don't have kids in 4-H and FFA, but you don't really even need a reason or an excuse to walk into your butcher shop and ask them, could you rib a carcass? Could I walk through your coolers? Could you just, explain like where do the ribeye steaks come from, and what's the difference between a New York strip steak? It's like, well, a ribeye's from the rib and a strip's from the loin section, but it's the same muscles. Your butchers are so happy to take the time and show you the carcasses that are hanging there. Because at the end of the day, livestock producers spend 18 months, 2 years, sometimes longer if those animals are Corrientes and they have a change of career. They spent many years raising those animals. And the butcher gets them for maybe 2 weeks. But then the customer gets them for a couple of days. Chefs only get them for, a couple of seconds, and then it's out the door. And that is the final opportunity to make that meat product the best it can be. So it doesn't matter all the end work that the meat producer or the livestock producers have done. It's the end product, the customers, the chefs, that they get the final say in how greatly we enjoy that meat product. And so even if young folks don't have an intention to ever, work in the meats industry, showing them what these animals look like on the rail and how best to care for that meat product so that they can be the best consumer of that meat product and do it justice when it's on their plate is one of the most valuable tools that we can teach folks. Because we're eating meat for our entire lives. Hopefully we've got a lot of meat eaters on here.
Very well said. It just is amazing everything that you know. And you're saying all of that. It really is. Ultimately, it's all about getting to the plate. And that's something where, regardless of whether you want to get your own meat, if you want to process your own meat, if any of it, we all can come together at the plate. And some of us don't eat meat, and some do, and that's totally different episode. We can do gardening later. My garden is finally blooming, and it's the end of October almost.
Oh no.
I'm a little late down here in the banana belt. I don't know what's going on, but I just think that, as I said, it's very well said, and I hope that all the listeners are learning a lot today, and that you might be able to take some away and share it with others and help other people kind of understand and connect with their food sources as well. And as Sierra said, I will link her website and her social media in the show notes and on the website. But you can direct message her and ask her questions directly. Or if you want to reach out to us, you can email. The email address is contact@miaanstine.com. I'll be happy to share what knowledge I have or point you in the right direction to learn more. Sierra, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so excited to share the knowledge. And right now, as I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, I have to send this to this person and this person and this person. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, this is Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, host of the Armed Lutheran Radio podcast, reminding you that the podcast you're listening to is a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Check out all the great content at selfdefenseradio.net.